The Don Mattingly baseball card that was as multidimensional as Donnie Baseball himself. In the 1980s, Topps developed a reputation for being a boring, stubborn old man of baseball cards. It's easy to understand why, too. When Fleer won their antitrust lawsuit against the old gum company in 1980, they were joined by Donruss as the new kids on the block, who hurried to push out an inaugural set in 1981. The quality of both issues were suspect, as we might expect under the circumstances, but they both came back the next year. More importantly, both Fleer and Donruss tried all sorts of new things, from wild designs to player stickers to 3D foldouts and more. And both companies produced cards on stark white cardstock that collectors claimed they wanted. Meanwhile, Topps continued to churn out their yearly 792 card sets on the mushy old brown stock that hobbyists had decried for years. And when the field expanded again with Score in 1988 and Upper Deck in 1989, Topps looked even more like a dinosaur. It's a perception that persists in some circles, and I've been guilty of viewing Topps as an unchanging monolith too. Sneaky innovation. If you take a critical look at what the company was doing throughout the 80s, the story isn't quite as bleak. In fact, the early to middle part of the decade appears downright innovative for Topps if you consider everything they did during those years. Among the changes and experiments that Topps rolled out from 1981 through 85. First, Topps traded sets issued in 1981. Topps base expanded to 792 cards in 1982. Crisp artistic and beloved picture-in-picture design in 1983. Premium white cardstock for 1983 Topps traded set. Topps player stickers and albums beginning in 1981. 1983 active leader foldouts. 1983 Michigan test issues replacing wax wrappers with Mylar. 1984 Supers. 1984 Nestle Parallels. And the list goes on and on and on. Looking back now, it seems that maybe our infatuation with that ugly brown cardstock clouded our judgment of all the good things that Topps was doing. And now, of course, doesn't that smushy cardboard make you nostalgic, just like a wax-stained cardback? A new dimension for baseball cards. But as much as I loved all the goodies I listed, Topps outdid themselves in 1985 when they issued one of my favorite oddball issues of all time, the 1985 Topps 3D Baseball Stars cards. Now, the idea of 3D cards was nothing new by 1985. Kellogg's had just finished a decade-plus long run in 1983, and Topps themselves issued a 3D set in 1968 that's among the rarest of all special issue modern sets. In both of those cases, though, the 3D effect was achieved through the use of a funky corrugated plastic card surface over top of a funky blurry photo, a combination that would make an old sailor seasick with just a flick of a wrist. In contrast, each card in the 1985 issue was actually three-dimensional. That is, each player was rendered in soft plastic that billowed out of a flat background to mimic the real-life contours of his face or batting stance. For good measure, Topps beefed up the card dimensions to 4 3/8 by 6 inches. It was an astounding effect for a 13-year-old kid accustomed to the standard flat 2.5 by 3.5 inch cardboard offerings of the day and pretty much every day before. The cards came one per pack and were wrapped in a crinkly paper wrapper that made the experience much more enjoyable. Cardbacks were blank, though they did feature adhesive strips so you could plaster their cards on your favorite surface. Far more enjoyable, at least for me, was studying the stark white backsides and marveling at the inverse relief of each player. Like so much else from the baseball cards in the 1980s, it was mesmerizing. Who else but Donnie Baseball? Truth is, I love every piece of this 30-card set. My instinct is to pick Dwight Gooden or Pete Rose, but I always touch on those guys. So instead, I'm going with the guy that was probably the hottest position player in the land during the summer of 1985, Don Mattingly. Not only was Mattingly the best hitter on the planet and the next Yankee legend, he was from Indiana, my home state. This is a tough combination to beat, and when you add in the classic bat-on-shoulder pose, rendered in that terrifying yet spectacular 3D plastic molding, Donnie Baseball's card is perfect. Maybe Topps was a concrete-bound Luddite of a company in the 1980s, but their concrete sure was colorful and multi-dimensional, don't you think?